The city hall was unusually quiet that late afternoon, with only a few soft echoes floating around the wide rehearsal room. The pianist hired for the big charity event had been practicing for hours, filling the hall with complicated runs and dramatic chords. He moved from piece to piece with confidence, convinced the show depended on him alone. He didn't notice much around him, except anything that interrupted his focus. While he played, the cleaner worked in the background, pushing a mop across the polished floor. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb anyone, especially the performer who clearly took himself very seriously. The cleaner kept his eyes on the ground most of the time. He didn't like drawing attention. To him, this job was simple and quiet, something he could do without getting in anyone's way. But the pianist had a short fuse that day. Maybe he felt pressure from the upcoming event. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he simply enjoyed being admired and hated when his audience was made up of empty chairs, instead of real listeners. Whatever the reason, he didn't like the sound of the mop sliding behind him during a difficult section of his piece. He pressed harder on the keys, letting the notes ring louder, as though trying to drown out the soft swish of the mop. When that didn't work, he stopped playing altogether and turned sharply toward the cleaner. "Do you mind?" he said, his tone sharp enough to break glass. "I'm trying to practice here. You can at least pretend to respect that." The cleaner froze for a moment, his hands tightening around the handle of the mop. He didn't look up right away. He never liked confrontations, especially ones he didn't cause. But after a breath, he lifted his eyes slightly, unsure what to say. "I'm just doing my job," he said quietly, almost apologetically. The pianist scoffed, shaking his head. "Well, maybe wait until I'm finished. You think playing is easy? You think anyone can just walk up and do what I'm doing?" The cleaner didn't respond. His face remained calm, but inside, something sank a little. He'd heard people talk like that before. People who didn't know him. People who thought they understood his place in the world just because of the uniform he wore. The pianist let out a dramatic sigh and leaned back on the bench. "Tell you what," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "If you think all this noise is nothing special, why don't you sit here and show me? Go ahead, play something better." The words weren't spoken as a real invitation. They were meant as a joke, a punchline. Really? A cleaner at a piano? In his mind, that was the funniest thing he could picture in that moment. A few staff members at the far end of the hall lifted their heads at the sudden tension. They recognized the tone, the shift in the air, and some exchanged uncertain looks. They weren't close enough to step in, but they watched carefully. The cleaner stood there quietly. He wasn't sure whether to walk away or respond. His heart beat a little faster, not because he felt embarrassed, but because something inside him stirred something he hadn't felt in years. He looked at the piano, then back at the pianist, who still wore that smug half-smile. He hadn't touched a piano in a long time, not since life threw him off the path he once dreamed of following. There were days when he would pass by this very hall and remember the feel of the keys under his fingers, the weight of those early ambitions. But those days were long behind him, buried under responsibilities and circumstances he never asked for. Still, the challenge hung in the air. The pianist raised an eyebrow, as if expecting the cleaner to laugh nervously and wave it off. Instead, the cleaner rested the mop against the wall. "You really want me to play?" he asked softly. The pianist shrugged. "If you think you can, why not give everyone here a little entertainment?" The cleaner hesitated. His hands felt heavy, as if remembering the past all at once. He didn't want attention. He didn't want trouble. And he certainly didn't want to embarrass himself in front of people who already doubted him. But something deeper pushed him forward. A quiet spark, a memory. A feeling he thought had died long ago. Slowly, he stepped toward the piano. Each step echoed louder than the pianist's playing had moments earlier. The few staff members watching straightened in their seats, sensing something unusual. Even the pianist's smirk faded slightly, though he tried to maintain his confidence. The cleaner reached the bench and stood still, staring at the polished keys. He didn't sit yet. He just looked like he was looking at a familiar face he hadn't seen in years. He remembered the long nights practicing when he was young. He remembered the dream of performing one day. And he remembered losing it all when life demanded something else from him. There were bills, responsibilities, family troubles, moments he wished had gone differently. One decision after another pushed him farther from the music he loved until he had no choice but to give it up entirely. The pianist crossed his arms. "Well, this isn't complicated. Just sit and play." The cleaner lowered himself onto the bench. He placed his fingers gently over the keys but didn't press down yet. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the room fade, letting the noise of the world shrink until only the quiet inside him remained. He wasn't doing this to prove anything, not to the pianist, not to the staff, not even to himself. He was doing this because something inside him needed to feel music again, even if only for a moment. The pianist cleared his throat loudly, impatient. Any day now. The cleaner opened his eyes. His fingers rested in position, steady and calm. He inhaled slowly, and just as he was about to press the first note, the entire room seemed to lean in. The staff stopped working. The pianist unconsciously shifted forward. Even the large space of the hall felt smaller, quieter, waiting. The cleaner's first note had not yet been played, but something had already changed. Something unseen had already begun. The silence before the sound felt heavy, meaningful. It was the kind of silence that comes right before a story takes a turn, before a truth steps out of hiding, before the unexpected happens. The cleaner didn't know how the moment would unfold. He didn't know how the pianist would react or how the staff would see him afterward. He only knew one thing for certain. For the first time in years, he was about to touch the piano again. And whether the world cared or not, this was a moment he could no longer walk away from. The cleaner sat at the piano with his fingers resting lightly on the keys. The hall was still, almost breathless, as though the walls themselves were waiting to see what he would do. He hadn't touched a piano in so long that even the weight of the keys felt unfamiliar. But it wasn't a threatening feeling. It was more like returning to a childhood home after years away. Everything seemed distant yet strangely close. He pressed the first key. The soft tone echoed through the large room, floating gently and lingering in the air. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. It carried something deeper, something that immediately made the people nearby stop what they were doing. Even the pianist, who moments ago had mocked him, blinked in surprise. That single note seemed to unlock something. Inside the cleaner, his hands shifted slowly, and he touched another key, then another, a simple sequence at first. Nothing complicated, but every sound he created held a kind of honesty that pulled the listeners in. The cleaner kept his eyes on the keys, not daring to look up. He wasn't playing for applause. He was playing because a quiet part of him needed to breathe again. Before long, the simple notes turned into a melody. It wasn't a famous song or anything well known. It was something he remembered from long ago, a piece he had created when he still believed the world had room for his dreams. The tune held both joy and sadness. It carried memories of the afternoons he spent practicing alone, dreaming of a future that felt so close back then. As the melody grew, the hall began to fill with quiet footsteps. A few crew members, who had been working in the storage rooms, wandered in with puzzled expressions. They followed the sound as if pulled by an invisible string. They didn't know who was playing, but the music told them something important was happening. The pianist stood beside the stage now, his arms no longer crossed. His smug expression had faded into something almost uncertain. He didn't understand how the cleaner, a person he assumed knew nothing about music, could play with such emotion. The notes weren't perfect in the technical sense, but they carried something he himself often struggled to show. One of the staff whispered to another, "Who is that?" "I think it's the cleaner," the other replied, surprised. The cleaner played on, unaware of the whispers forming around him. His mind drifted back 2 years ago, to the times he performed privately for people who believed in him. He remembered the teacher who once told him he had a gift. He remembered how proud he felt. And he remembered the moment everything fell apart: family issues, financial troubles, things that forced him to let go of music. But right now, in this hall, none of that mattered. His fingers moved gently yet confidently, bringing the melody to life. He didn't rush. He didn't show off. He just played the way he used to when no one was watching. The hall grew fuller as more people stepped inside: workers, organizers, sound technicians, even a few early guests who arrived ahead of schedule, all drawn by the music. Some stood along the walls, others quietly found seats. The room didn't feel cold or empty anymore. It felt warm, alive. The cleaner's hands moved with growing strength. The melody deepened, shifting into a richer, more emotional tone. It carried the weight of everything he'd gone through, every dream lost, every hope pushed aside. Yet it also carried the beauty he still held inside, something he didn't even know he had kept. People exchanged soft glances. Some felt a small sting in their chest, as if the music reminded them of their own forgotten dreams. The room wasn't just listening, they were feeling. The pianist stepped closer, unable to hide his shock anymore. He recognized the depth in the cleaner's playing. He recognized the emotion, and he knew In that moment, that he had been wrong, completely wrong about who this man was. The cleaner still didn't look up. His fingers were trembling slightly, but the trembling wasn't fear, it was emotion, a release he hadn't expected. He moved into a gentle slowdown, letting the melody stretch softly. The sound seemed to float above the audience, touching every listener in a quiet, personal way. A woman from the organizing team covered her mouth with her hand. She hadn't expected to feel something like this. A stage worker leaned against a pillar with a stunned expression. Even the sound technician, who rarely paid attention to live rehearsals, stood with his arms hanging loosely at his sides, just listening. The cleaner's heart pressed against his ribs. He could feel the old version of himself rising inside him, the one who once believed he had a future in music, the one who used to dream boldly instead of hiding behind a mop and uniform. For a moment, he let that version breathe. He closed his eyes, allowing the music to guide him instead of the other way around. His hands softened, then strengthened, shifting between gentle touches and deeper chords. The melody became fuller, like a story unfolding. Some listeners felt their eyes warm as if tears were gathering without permission. The pianist felt a strange tightness in his chest. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't upset. He was humbled, deeply humbled. He realized he had spoken without knowing anything. He had judged too quickly, too blindly, and now he couldn't look away from the truth in front of him. The music reached a soft peak, a moment that felt both triumphant and sad. It wasn't loud or powerful in the dramatic sense. It was powerful in meaning. It was the kind of sound that made silence afterward feel sacred. The cleaner finally pressed the final chord, letting it linger as gently as his first note had begun. The sound drifted through the hall, landing softly before fading into the quiet. Then there was nothing, not a cough, not a shuffle, not even a whisper, just stillness. The cleaner slowly lifted his hands off the keys. He kept his eyes down, unsure whether he should look up. He felt exposed, as though he had opened a part of himself he had kept locked away for years. He took a small breath and finally looked at the piano lid instead of the crowd. He could feel dozens of eyes on him, but strangely, he didn't feel embarrassed. He felt human again. After a long moment, the pianist stepped forward. His voice didn't carry the arrogance it held earlier. It was softer, almost careful. He began, but he couldn't even finish the question. He didn't know how to ask what he wanted to know. He didn't know how to express the amazement he felt or the regret that had settled inside him. The cleaner didn't speak. He simply placed his hands on his lap and waited. The audience didn't applaud. Yet, not because they didn't want to, but because the moment felt too delicate to break. It was as if everyone knew that sound had created something fragile and beautiful, and they didn't want to ruin it. One staff member whispered, "I've never heard anything like that." Another nodded slowly, unable to take their eyes off the cleaner. The pianist opened his mouth again, but once more, the words failed him. He had never been at a loss like this. His pride had melted away, leaving behind something honest. The cleaner finally stood up from the bench, though he didn't walk away. He placed a hand gently on the piano, feeling the smooth surface beneath his fingertips. A soft, grateful look passed through his eyes. He whispered, almost to himself, "I didn't think I would ever play again." The hall stayed silent, as if honoring that confession. For the first time, everyone in the room saw him not as a cleaner, not as a background worker, not as someone invisible. They saw him as a person with a story that had just begun to reveal itself. The cleaner stood beside the piano, unsure of what to do next. The room was still filled with people who had wandered in, pulled by the music he had just played. Their eyes stayed on him, quiet and thoughtful, as though they were trying to understand the person they had overlooked for so long. It was strange for him to be the center of attention. He had spent most of his life avoiding the spotlight, staying in the background where no one asked questions. He felt a little shaken inside, not in a bad way, but in a way he couldn't describe, like a door inside him had opened, and he wasn't sure how to close it again. The pianist took a few slow steps forward. His proud posture from earlier was gone. He looked different now, less polished, less sure of himself. His expression held a mix of confusion and respect. He kept glancing at the piano, almost as if trying to understand how the cleaner had managed to bring out such sound from an instrument he had believed only trained players could command. "Where did you learn to play like that?" the pianist finally asked, his voice lower than before. The cleaner hesitated, not wanting to draw too much attention to himself. "I learned when I was young," he said softly. "A long time ago." The pianist waited, expecting more, but the cleaner didn't continue. He didn't like talking about his past. It held too many memories, some warm, some painful, and most of them felt too personal to share with a stranger who had mocked him only minutes earlier. The staff members who had gathered around still didn't move. Some were leaning against walls, while others sat in seats they never planned to occupy. They all seemed caught between awe and curiosity. Finally, after what felt like a long quiet moment, someone from the organizing team stepped forward. "You played beautifully," she said. Her voice was gentle, but steady, as if she wanted to make sure her words reached him clearly. The cleaner nodded, unsure how to respond. Compliments felt unfamiliar, especially in this job. Most days, people barely noticed him. They walked past him without seeing him. They spoke around him as if he were a piece of furniture. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes tracing the piano keys again. The pianist rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't expect that," he admitted. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like I did." The cleaner didn't look up. He wasn't angry. He was used to people underestimating him. But hearing the apology meant more than he realized. "It's fine," he murmured. "You didn't know." The pianist let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He was relieved but also embarrassed. He had spent years practicing, performing, and building a name for himself. Yet he had never played with the natural emotion the cleaner had shown. His own skill came from discipline. The cleaner's came from something deeper. One of the sound technicians stepped closer. "Do you still play?" he asked. The cleaner shook his head slowly. "Not anymore. Not for a long time." "Why not?" someone else asked from the back. The cleaner didn't respond. He wasn't sure how to explain. Life had shifted. Responsibilities had piled up. Dreams had slipped away when bills and survival became more important. And somewhere along the line, he had convinced himself he no longer deserved to dream. He stepped away from the bench, giving the pianist space to return to it. But the pianist didn't move. He just stared at the instrument as if it were something new to him. "Would you play another?" the pianist asked, surprising everyone, including himself. The cleaner blinked. He hadn't expected the request. A small ripple went through the crowd as people straightened up, curious and hopeful. "I don't know," the cleaner said softly. "I wasn't supposed to be here for this. I should get back to work." "The work can wait," someone said from the corner. Another added, "Let him play if he wants to." The cleaner looked around at the faces watching him. None of them seemed annoyed or impatient. They weren't looking at him like a cleaner anymore. They were looking at him like a musician. The thought made his chest tighten in a strange, emotional way. He sat back down slowly. His fingers hovered above the keys again, unsure where to begin. He didn't want to repeat the same piece. He wanted to play something that meant something to him. He let his fingers fall into a soft pattern, one he had never played in public before. It was a tune he wrote the night he realized he had to give up music for good. It had stayed buried in his mind all these years, untouched and unspoken. The moment he began, the hall grew quiet again. The melody was gentle but heavy with emotion. Each note carried a story of moments of hope, moments of fear, moments where he felt life slipping out of his control. His hands moved with slow purpose, shaping the sound with delicate care. People in the room felt their chest tighten once more. It wasn't dramatic music. It wasn't loud or fast, but it carried a truth that was impossible to ignore. The pianist listened with a growing sense of wonder. He could hear something he hadn't noticed before, the sound of a person who once loved music so deeply that even years of silence couldn't erase it. The cleaner's expression softened as he played. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing steadied. He looked less like someone worn down by life and more like someone who had found a small piece of himself again. When he finished the second piece, he lifted his hands slowly, letting the final notes fade into the space around him. This time, the room didn't stay silent. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the entire hall filled with warm applause that wrapped around him like a gentle wave. The cleaner lowered his head, overwhelmed. He wasn't used to applause. He wasn't used to being seen. The pianist stepped up beside him and placed a hand on the piano gently. "You belong here," he said quietly. "More than you know." The cleaner swallowed hard. He didn't trust his voice enough to answer. A few people approached him, asking small, kind questions. They wanted to know if he had ever performed before. They wanted to know if he would be willing to play again. They wanted to know his story, not out of judgment, but out of respect. For the first time in a very long while, the cleaner felt something rising inside him, a feeling he had buried long ago, a feeling he never thought he would experience again. Hope. The hall slowly emptied as people returned to their tasks, still whispering about the unexpected performance. But their whispers were warm, filled with admiration instead of surprise. The pianist lingered for a moment. The event tonight, he said hesitantly. Maybe you could join in even for a moment? People would love to hear you. The cleaner looked down, unsure. I'm just a cleaner, not today, the pianist replied softly. Not after what you showed us. The cleaner didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he deserved to stand before a crowd. He didn't know if he had the courage. But he did know one thing. Something inside him had awakened. And no matter what happened next, he couldn't push it back into silence anymore. The cleaner stayed near the piano long after the others returned to their work. The hall slowly returned to its usual rhythm, footsteps echoing across the floor, chairs being adjusted, equipment being checked. But the way people moved felt different now. Every time someone passed him, they gave a small nod or a warm smile, something he wasn't used to. It made him feel both humbled and strangely visible. He ran his fingers lightly across the piano keys, not pressing them, just feeling the smooth surface. He still couldn't believe what had just happened. He had only planned to clean the hall this morning, just like every day. He hadn't planned to open a part of himself that had been silent for so long. He looked down at his uniform and then at the piano. Feeling torn between two worlds, the pianist approached again, holding a cup of warm water. You should drink something, he said, offering it gently. The cleaner took it, surprised by the gesture. Thank you, he said softly. The pianist didn't leave. He stood beside him, quiet at first, as though searching for the right words. You know, he finally said, music like yours doesn't come from practice. It comes from life. The cleaner didn't know how to respond. He looked away, unsure if he deserved praise as deep as that. The event tonight is important, the pianist continued. A lot of people will be there. They come expecting a certain kind of show. But what you played earlier, it was real. People felt it. The cleaner tensed. He understood what the pianist was trying to say, but the idea of performing in front of a full audience scared him more than he wanted to admit. I don't know if I can, he whispered. You already did, the pianist replied. You moved everyone in this room without trying to impress anyone. That's more powerful than anything I could rehearse. The cleaner swallowed, his chest tightening. He wished he could believe that, but a part of him still felt small, still felt like the boy who had lost his chance at music long ago. A woman from the organizing team walked over. The director wants to meet you, she said, her smile wide and warm. The cleaner blinked. Meet me, why? Because he heard about your playing, she replied. Word spreads fast around here. He felt lightheaded. He couldn't imagine speaking to someone with authority, let alone someone running such a large event. But he followed her, walking slowly through the hall with the pianist beside him. In a nearby room filled with cables and equipment, the director stood talking with two crew members. When he saw the cleaner, he broke into a smile. So you're the mystery pianist, he said. The cleaner shifted uncomfortably. I just played a little. The director laughed lightly. Everyone is talking about it. I had 3 people come to me already saying they felt something they haven't felt in years. He crossed his arms. We could use that kind of heart tonight. The cleaner froze. I can't perform in front of a crowd. I'm not a performer anymore. Maybe not on paper, the director said gently. But in soul, you absolutely are. The cleaner looked down at the floor. He didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to run back to the storage room where everything was predictable and safe. But another part, the part that woke up the moment he played, pulled him in a different direction. You don't have to decide now, the director said kindly. Just think about it. The show is in a few hours. If you choose not to play, that's fine. But if you choose to honor the talent you have, we'll make space for you. The cleaner nodded, overwhelmed. He thanked the director and stepped back out into the hallway. The pianist followed him. What are you thinking? The cleaner took a long breath. I'm thinking that this wasn't supposed to happen. Maybe it was, the pianist said. They walked back into the hall. The lights were brighter now as the crew prepared for the evening. The cleaner watched them set up microphones, adjust cables, and tighten bolts on the stage structure. Everything was moving fast, like the world was ready for a show he wasn't sure he belonged in. He found a quiet corner and sat down, resting his elbows on his knees. He stared at the floor, lost in thought. He remembered being younger, sitting in a small practice room with an old piano. He remembered dreaming of performing for people who believed in him. He remembered feeling unstoppable. But he also remembered the day he had to choose responsibility over dreams. Life had forced him into a different role, one that didn't leave room for music. He touched his fingers together, feeling the slight tremble that came whenever he thought of playing in public. The pianist sat beside him. "You're scared," he said gently. The cleaner didn't deny it. "I'm not meant for that stage. You were meant for the music," the pianist replied. "The stage is just a place. It doesn't define you. What matters is the sound you bring to it." The cleaner closed his eyes. The sound he had brought earlier still echoed in his mind. It didn't feel like something he created. It felt like something that simply flowed through him. "What if I fail?" he whispered. "Then you fail with courage," the pianist said softly. "But what if you don't fail? What if you give the audience something they'll never forget?" The cleaner said nothing. He didn't trust his voice. As the afternoon passed, more people entered the hall for final checks and rehearsals. The cleaner continued working quietly, sweeping floors and wiping surfaces, trying to disappear into his tasks. But even as he cleaned, people approached him with warm smiles and quiet compliments. "You're playing earlier. It made my day," one crew member said. "I hope you play tonight," another whispered. Every word added weight to the decision he still hadn't made. When evening finally approached, the hall transformed completely. Rows of seats filled the floor. Soft lights glowed along the stage edges. The grand piano sat at the center, polished, waiting. The cleaner stood in the shadows, watching as the audience began to arrive. People dressed in formal clothes took their seats. Soft chatter filled the air. He felt his heart beating faster. The pianist approached him one last time. "Are you going to play?" he asked quietly. The cleaner looked at the stage, then at his hands. "I don't know if I can." "You can," the pianist replied. "You already did. This is just a bigger room." The cleaner's breath shook. "What if I freeze? What if the audience laughs? What if I stop?" The pianist said gently. "Listen to me. You have something rare, something people can feel even before they fully understand it. You don't owe anyone perfection. You only owe them honesty." The cleaner stared at the piano again. Something inside him shifted, fear mixed with longing, doubt mixed with hope. He remembered the feeling when he pressed the first note earlier that day. The way the sound had awakened something in him. The way it made the world pause. He wanted that feeling again. He stood up slowly. The pianist's eyes widened slightly. "Does that mean?" The cleaner didn't answer. He stepped toward the stage. Step by step, quiet, steady. The hall lights dimmed as the event prepared to begin. People took their seats. The air grew still, and the cleaner walked toward the piano, carrying nothing but the courage he didn't know he had. The hall stayed quiet even after the cleaner finished his last note. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full, like the whole crowd was holding its breath without realizing it. The cleaner sat there for a moment, unsure if he should stand up or quietly slip away. He looked at his hands, surprised by how steady they felt. For years they had only held mops, brooms, and trash bags. Now they had brought out a part of him he thought he lost long ago. When he finally stood up, he heard a soft sound behind him. It grew a little louder, then louder. Suddenly the entire hall burst into loud applause that rolled through the space like a wave. People clapped with both hands, some even rising to their feet. Others wiped their eyes. A few shook their heads in disbelief, as if they had just seen something they never expected. The cleaner didn't know where to look. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. He only knew how to clean corners, replace light bulbs, and lock the building after events. He didn't know how to stand on a stage while people cheered for him. But even in the middle of the noise, he could sense one thing clearly. Something inside him had changed. A door he had shut years ago had opened again. The pianist who had mocked him earlier stepped forward from the side of the stage. His face did not show the smug confidence he carried before. Instead, it showed something closer to shame, mixed with something like respect. He approached slowly, almost as if he wasn't sure he even deserved to be near the man he mocked. The cleaner looked at him, waiting. The pianist opened his mouth, but no words came out for a moment. He had spent his whole life performing in front of crowds, winning competitions, teaching students, and giving sharp comments. But now, in front of the cleaner, he suddenly felt small. After a few seconds he managed to speak. He gave a quiet apology. The words weren't fancy. They weren't rehearsed. They came out simple, honest, and without any pride behind them. He admitted that he had judged the cleaner unfairly. He admitted that he assumed talent belonged only to people on stage, not to someone sweeping floors in the background. He said he was wrong. People in the hall listened closely. They expected the cleaner to answer right away, but he didn't. He took a moment to think. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't humiliated. What he felt instead was a strange kind of calm that came from knowing the truth had revealed itself on its own. He didn't need to prove anything. His music already had. Finally he nodded and accepted the apology. He didn't say much. He simply said that everyone carries a story, and not all stories are visible at first glance. His voice was soft, but the whole hall seemed to hear it clearly after that. One of the event organizers hurried toward the stage. He had been standing in the back during the performance, and he looked stunned. He shook the cleaner's hand with a kind of excitement that reminded people of someone discovering a lost treasure. He asked the cleaner to stay for the evening performance. Not as a cleaner, as a performer. The cleaner blinked a few times, thinking he misunderstood, but the organizer repeated the offer. He said the hall had never heard anything so heartfelt and powerful from someone who wasn't even part of the program. He said the crowd deserved to hear it again. The audience around them nodded, showing their agreement. The cleaner felt something warm stir inside his chest. It wasn't pride. It was hope. The thing he lost long ago. The thing he hid under years of tiredness, bills, side jobs, and quiet corners. It was still there. He looked down at the piano again. The polished surface reflected the stage lights. He felt the old feeling return. The same one he had as a young student before everything in his life fell apart. Back then, music was all he knew. But life had its own storms, and he was forced to step away. Now, after all these years, that storm seemed to lift. He said yes. The hall erupted into applause again, even louder than before. It wasn't just noise. It was support. It was people believing in him. It was strangers encouraging him to stand on a path he abandoned because he had no choice. As the evening approached, word spread about what had happened. People who planned to skip the event now rushed to attend. Those already inside the building refused to leave their seats. Even the staff, who usually stayed in the back, moved closer to the front. They wanted to witness this unexpected moment. When the time came for him to walk on stage again, he felt nervous. His hands weren't shaking, but his heart beat quicker than before. He didn't have fancy clothes. He didn't have stage shoes or a prepared speech. He came just as he was, simple, humble, and honest. And somehow, that felt right. The pianist who mocked him earlier introduced him to the crowd. This time there was no pride in his voice, only respect. He told the audience that talent can be found anywhere, even in people we overlook. Then he stepped aside and let the cleaner take the seat at the piano. The cleaner sat down. He placed his hands gently on the keys. The whole room leaned forward. The lights dimmed slightly. A soft hush fell across the hall. He started to play. His music flowed freely, filled with every story he lived and every emotion he had carried in silence. The melody wasn't perfect, but it felt real. It felt like life. It felt like someone finally letting his heart breathe after years of keeping it quiet. Audience members leaned forward, drawn in by the honesty of each note. Some closed their eyes. Others watched his hands closely, amazed at the grace behind each movement. No one talked. No one looked away. It was as if the whole building held itself still just to listen. When he finished, the applause that followed wasn't just loud. It was deep. It was long. It carried the kind of admiration that stays with a person forever. After the show, the organizer approached him again. He asked if the cleaner would be willing to join future events, not as staff, but as a featured performer. He also mentioned a few music program directors who wanted to meet him. The cleaner almost couldn't believe it. A day that started with mops and buckets had turned into a night filled with applause and invitations. Life had taken a sharp turn, and for once, it turned in his favor. He accepted the new opportunities, grateful and still in shock. As he walked out of the hall that night, he looked up at the sky. It seemed a little brighter than before. For the first time in years, he felt like he had reclaimed something precious. Not fame, not money, something deeper, something he thought he lost forever. He had reclaimed his dream, and all of it started with a single note that froze a room and warmed every heart inside it.